Due to an emergency surgery, I arrived late to my wedding. As soon as I reached the gate, over 20 people from my husband's side blocked my way and yelled, "My son has married someone else. Get out!" But they didn't know the full story of why I was late or whose life hung in the balance. Standing there in my ruined white dress, I looked at the faces of people I had spent 3 years trying to impress. They looked triumphant, like they had finally found the excuse they needed to discard me. 3 hours earlier, the world had been perfect. I was in the bridal suite, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror, while my mother fastened the pearl buttons of my gown. The silk felt cool against my skin, a promise of the life I was about to start with Julian. Then the sharp, relentless beep of my trauma pager shattered the silence. It wasn't just any call. It was a code crimson, meaning immediate intervention was required. I looked at the clock, then at my mother, knowing I was about to ruin everything. There was no choice to make. I ran out the door, gathering the skirts of my dress in one hand, while dialing the on-call chief with the other. By the time I scrubbed in, the patient was already crashing. He was a young man, barely 20, his chest cavity decimated by a car accident. My team looked at me with wide eyes, seeing the bride beneath the gown. I ignored the whispers and focused on the bleeding vessel. Time dissolved into a blur of clamps, suction, and monitor beeps. When the boy's heart finally stabilized, the adrenaline crashed out of my system, leaving only cold dread. I glanced at the wall clock and felt my stomach drop. I was 90 minutes late. I stripped off the bloody scrubs, revealing the wedding dress underneath, but I hadn't been careful enough. A single smear of dark red blood stained the white silk near my hip. I didn't have time to clean it. I grabbed my keys and sprinted for the parking garage, praying that Julian would still be waiting. The drive to the estate was a blur of skipped red lights and terrifying speed. When I finally pulled up to the iron gates of the Vance family manor, the sun was already dipping low in the sky. I expected to see empty chairs or a worried groom pacing the driveway. Instead, I heard applause. Lauder. The swelling notes of the recessionary music drifted over the high hedges. My heart hammered against my ribs, louder than the engine. The ceremony hadn't been canceled. It had happened without me. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching loudly under my heels. Before I could take 5 steps, the heavy oak doors swung open, but not to welcome me. Evelyn Vance marched out first, flanked by aunts and cousins who formed a human wall. Her eyes dropped to the bloodstain on my dress, then rose to my face with a sneer of absolute victory. She didn't ask where I had been or look concerned. She simply crossed her arms, blocking my view of the man standing behind her. Evelyn did not move an inch. Behind her, the crowd parted just enough for me to see the altar. Standing there, where I was supposed to be, was a woman in a fitted lace gown that I recognized immediately. Sarah, Julian's high school sweetheart. She held a bouquet of white roses that looked identical to the ones I had ordered months ago. Evelyn smiled, a cold expression that did not reach her eyes. "Julian needs a wife who puts family first," she said. "Not a career." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stepped forward, my hands shaking as I gripped the edges of my ruined dress. "This is insane," I said, my voice sounding thin in the open air. "I need to speak to Julian." Now, 2 of Julian's cousins stepped up to reinforce the wall, their arms crossed over their chests. The smell of expensive cologne and judgment rolled off them. They were enjoying this. "He is busy signing the certificate," one cousin sneered. Movement flickered in the shadows of the archway. Julian stepped into the light, adjusting his cufflinks with nervous, jerky movements. He looked perfect in his tuxedo, the one I had helped him pick out, but his face was pale. He saw me standing there, breathless and stained with blood, and he flinched. For a second, I thought he would run to me. Instead, he looked at his mother for permission. Evelyn gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Julian stayed exactly where he was. "Julian?" I called out, ignoring the wall of relatives. I was in surgery. A boy was dying on the table. I could not just leave him. My explanation hung in the air, raw and honest. But the crowd only rippled with amusement. Evelyn laughed. A sharp sound like breaking glass. "Always an excuse," she said loudly enough for the guests inside to hear. "You think your work makes you special. But today, you proved exactly why you do not belong in this family." I looked at Julian, begging him with my eyes to defend me. He knew how hard I worked. He knew I paid the rent on our apartment while his startup failed. But he looked down at his shoes. "It is done, Becca," he mumbled, his voice barely carrying over the wind. Sarah was here. She was ready. The betrayal was not just that he replaced me. It was that he treated me like a vendor who missed a delivery slot. As he raised his hand to rub the back of his neck, the sunlight caught the gold rim of his watch. My stomach twisted. It was the vintage Rolex I had bought him for his birthday last month. I had taken extra shifts for weeks to afford it. Now he was wearing it while marrying another woman. He saw me looking at it and quickly dropped his hand to his side. He knew exactly what he was doing. He just did not care. Evelyn stepped closer, invading my personal space until I could smell her hairspray. "Go back to your hospital," she hissed. "You are clearly more comfortable with blood than with breeding." She turned her back on me, signaling the cousins to close ranks again. I stood alone on the gravel, the engine of my car still ticking behind me. I had saved a life today, but as the gate clicked shut, I realized I had lost the life I thought I wanted. I turned to leave, my heels sinking into the gravel. The Vance family watched with smug satisfaction, their victory complete. Evelyn was already turning back to the party, dismissing me like a servant who had been fired. But then a low rumble vibrated through the ground beneath my feet. It was not the wind. A convoy of 3 black SUVs swept around the curve of the drive. Flanking a long midnight, blue limousine, the sheer size of the vehicles commanded immediate silence. Evelyn froze mid-step, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the intrusion. The lead SUV stopped inches from my bumper, effectively blocking my exit. A heavy silence fell over the driveway as dust settled in the air. Then, the realization hit Julian's face. He whispered something to his mother, and her expression shifted instantly from annoyance to hungry delight. "It is Elias Thorne," she hissed, smoothing her dress frantically. "The venture capitalist." Suddenly, I was invisible again. They were preening for money. The chauffeur opened the rear door of the limousine with practiced smoothness. A silver-haired man stepped out, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the courtyard. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my entire medical school tuition. Evelyn stepped forward, a plastic smile plastered on her face, extending a trembling hand. "Mr. Thorne, what an honor," she gushed. "We did not know you would be joining our celebration." Elias Thorne did not even blink. He walked straight past her. His eyes were locked entirely on me. I instinctively tried to hide the bloodstain on my hip, feeling small and dirty in front of this titan of industry. But his gaze was not judgmental. It was intense and searching. He stopped 2 feet away from me, ignoring the stunned gasps of the wedding party behind him. "Dr. Rebecca Sterling," he said, his voice deep and steady. "It was not a question. I was told I could find you here." I nodded slowly, too shocked to speak. "My security team tracked your car from the hospital," Torn continued, his voice thick with emotion. "The chief of surgery told me what you did." He took a breath, his composure cracking just enough to show the terrified father underneath. "You held my son's heart in your hands for 4 hours. Then, the unthinkable happened. Elias Thorne, a man who made governments tremble, bowed his head to me. Thank you for saving him. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd like electricity. Evelyn looked between us, her face going pale. She tried to laugh, a nervous, hacking sound. "Oh, there must be a mistake," she stammered, stepping closer to Thorn. "Rebecca is just a resident. She was late because she is disorganized." Thorn turned to her slowly. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by glacial coldness. "She was late," he said, "because she was saving the heir to my estate." Julian tried to intervene, looking desperate to salvage the moment. "Mr. Thorn, please come inside for a drink. We can explain everything." Thorn looked at the manor house, then at the iron gates, and finally at the "Just Married" sign. "I do not drink with people who insult my family's savior," he said. He looked at Evelyn. "And considering I hold the commercial mortgage on this property, I suggest you stop screaming at my guest." The silence on the driveway was heavy, broken only by the hum of the limousine's idling engine. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed like a fish, her face draining of color. Thorn ignored her completely, turning his attention back to me with a gentle expression. "Dr. Sterling, you look exhausted," he said quietly. "My driver can take you anywhere you wish to go." It was not just an offer of a ride. It was an escape hatch from the nightmare. I looked past Thorn to where Julian stood next to Sarah. He was whispering urgently to his mother, his eyes darting between the limousine and the house. He was not looking at me with regret. He was calculating the financial damage of offending a billionaire. That small, greedy gesture broke the last thread of my attachment to him. I turned to Thorn. "Get me out of here," I said. Thorn nodded to his driver, who held the heavy door open. As I slid onto the plush leather seat, the chaos finally erupted behind me. Evelyn lunged forward, her high heels scraping on the gravel. "Rebecca, wait. We can discuss this," she shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. Julian started running toward the car, shouting my name as if he had not just married someone else. But the heavy door thudded shut, sealing them out. The tinted glass turned their frantic waving into a silent, pathetic movie. The interior of the car was a sanctuary of cool air and soft light. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes as the vehicle glided away from the estate. My phone buzzed against my thigh, vibrating violently against the silk of my dress. I pulled it out. "Julian, pick up right now. My mom is freaking out. You need to fix this." Then another from Evelyn. "Ungrateful girl. Tell him we are family." Thorn watched me read the messages, his face unreadable in the dim light. "They are worried about their line of credit, not your feelings," he said bluntly. I looked up at him, surprising myself with a dry laugh. "I bought his watch," I whispered. "I paid their rent." Thorn reached into a leather satchel next to him. "I know," he replied. "My team does thorough background checks on anyone who operates on my family." He placed a thick manila folder on the seat between us. "The Vance family business has been insolvent for months," Thorn explained calmly. "They needed your salary to float their personal debts until the merger." I stared at the file, feeling a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I opened it to see bank statements, loan defaults, and emails. They had not just used me for money. They had planned to bleed me dry. "They were banking on your compliance," Thorn said, pouring a glass of water from a crystal decanter. "But they underestimated your spine." My phone buzzed again. It was a photo from Julian. A selfie of us from happier times, captioned "Baby please." I looked at the manila folder, then at the desperate text. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt powerful. I held the power button down until the screen went black, silencing the man I was supposed to marry. 2 days later, the summons arrived in a thick gray envelope. It sat on my desk like a physical threat. I walked down the sterile hallway toward the administration wing, my heels clicking a rhythm that felt too fast for my heartbeat. Dr. Holloway, the chief of staff, refused to meet my eyes when I entered the conference room. He gestured to a leather chair opposite a glass table. "Sit down, Dr. Sterling," he said. The air in the room was stale. Holloway slid a single sheet of paper across the glass surface. "A formal ethics complaint has been filed against you," he stated flatly. I picked it up, the paper feeling heavy. The name at the top was Evelyn Vance. The accusation was monstrous. It claimed I had abandoned a scheduled surgery to attend a personal event, thereby endangering a patient. "This is a lie," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. "I was in the OR. The logs are being audited," Holloway replied, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Vance has gone to the press. She is claiming emotional distress and professional negligence." He leaned back, rubbing his temples tiredly. "Until this is cleared, you are on administrative leave. Effective immediately." I felt the blood drain from my face. My career was the only thing I had left. Evelyn knew that. She was not just trying to ruin my reputation. She was trying to starve me into submission. I walked out of the office in a daze, clutching the suspension notice. The lobby was busy with the afternoon shift change. But one figure stood out near the elevators. Julian. He was wearing a casual jacket, looking like the man I used to love. He saw me and offered a small, sad smile. "Rough meeting?" he asked. The casual tone of his voice made my skin crawl. He blocked my path to the exit. "We need to talk, Becca." He guided me toward a quiet corner near the vending machines. "Mom is really upset," he said, keeping his voice low. "But I think I can talk her down." He reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away sharply. "She filed a complaint, Julian. She is trying to strip my license." He shrugged, as if it was a minor misunderstanding. "She just wants an apology, publicly. Admit you were wrong to cause a scene, and this goes away." I stared at him, trying to process the sheer audacity. "You want me to apologize for saving a life?" Julian sighed. "It is just words. Look, Sarah is, well, it is a business arrangement. A merger." He stepped closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "But she is not you. We can still see each other. I can set you up in an apartment uptown." He smiled, expecting me to be grateful. "You would be taken care of." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He was not a victim of his mother's bullying. He was her active partner. He wanted my salary, my submission, and my silence, all while keeping his rich wife. I looked at the man I had almost married and felt nothing but cold, sharp disgust. "I do not want to be your wife anymore, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the lobby noise. "I want to be your nightmare." The hearing took place in the hospital's executive boardroom, a sterile space designed to intimidate anyone who entered. A long mahogany table stretched between us like a battlefield, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Evelyn sat at the far end, dressed in somber black, as if mourning a tragedy she had invented herself. She dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing for the 5 board members who held my career in their hands. They shuffled papers, looking wary. I sat alone, my hands clasped tightly on the cold table surface. Dr. Sterling has always been unstable. Evelyn began, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. She looked at the board members, ensuring she had their attention. "On the day of my son's wedding, she abandoned her professional obligations to cause a scene at our private residence." She paused for effect, letting the lie settle in the air like toxic smoke. She arrived bloody and manic, screaming at guests. It was terrifying. A doctor like that is a liability to this prestigious institution. The chairman scribbled notes, nodding along with her poisoned narrative. Dr. Holloway cleared his throat, looking at me over the rim of his glasses. "Dr. Sterling, these are serious allegations regarding your conduct and mental state." He tapped the file in front of him. "Mrs. Vance claims you were not in surgery during the critical window, but were instead traveling to the venue. The air in the room grew thin. If I could not prove my location, my license would be suspended pending a long investigation. Evelyn smirked behind her handkerchief, confident that her social standing outweighed my word. I stood up, smoothing the front of my scrub top. "Mrs. Vance is mistaken," I said clearly. I slid a flash drive across the polished wood. That drive contains the time, stamped security footage from the OR hallway, and the digital anesthesia logs. I pointed to the screen on the wall. I was scrubbed in from 10 a.m. until 2:15 p.m. The timestamps are unalterable. The board members murmured, leaning in. Evelyn's smirk faltered slightly. She had expected me to cry, not to bring digital forensics to a character assassination. Evelyn slammed her hand on the table, abandoning the grieving mother act. "Computers can be manipulated," she snapped, her voice rising an octave. "My son, Julian, will testify that she called him in a rage during those hours." She looked desperately at the door, expecting Julian to walk in and back her up. "She is a liar who humiliated my family." The board looked back at me, hesitation creeping into their eyes. They feared a lawsuit from a wealthy donor more than they cared about the truth. Before I could respond, the heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open. Elias Thorne walked in, flanked by two corporate attorneys in gray suits. He did not ask for permission to enter, he simply occupied the space. The board members scrambled to stand up, recognizing the city's most powerful philanthropist. "Mr. Thorne," Holloway stammered, knocking over his pen. "We are in a closed session." Thorne ignored him, walking until he stood directly behind my chair, his hand resting on the backrest. "I am here to provide a witness statement," Thorne announced, his voice filling the room with absolute authority. He looked at Evelyn with cold, hard eyes. "Dr. Sterling was not causing a scene at your wedding at noon. She was wrist, deep in my son's chest cavity, saving his life." He placed a signed affidavit on the table. I was in the observation gallery. I watched every minute of the procedure. Evelyn shrank back in her chair. Her face turned the color of ash. There was no recovering from this. Thorne was not finished. He turned to the board chairman. "I understand the Vance family is a donor to this hospital." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "However, I cannot support an institution that entertains slander from morally bankrupt individuals." He pulled a second document from his jacket. "As of this morning, Vance Industries has defaulted on their primary loans, which my firm holds." He looked at Evelyn. "You are not a donor, Mrs. Vance. You are a debtor. And I am calling in the debt." The atmosphere in the room flipped instantly. Holloway looked at Evelyn with open disdain, realizing her influence had just evaporated. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice icy. "It appears your complaint is without merit." He gestured to the security guard standing by the door. "Please escort Mrs. Vance off the premises immediately." Evelyn stood up, shaking with rage and humiliation. She looked at me one last time, opening her mouth to speak, but she found no words. She was powerless, and she knew it. As the guard let a sputtering Evelyn out of the room, I let out a breath I had been holding for days. The weight on my chest lifted. Thorne turned to me, his expression softening. "You saved my legacy, Dr. Sterling," he said quietly. "I will always protect yours." We walked out of the boardroom together, leaving the stunned administrators behind us. The sound of the heavy doors closing felt like a final judgment. The Vance dynasty had not just lost a battle, they had ceased to exist. The hospital corridors buzzed with a frantic energy that had nothing to do with medical emergencies. Everyone had seen the viral headlines. A local business blog had leaked the details of the hearing, likely tipped off by a vindictive board member. The replacement bride was trending locally. accompanied by grainy footage of Evelyn being escorted out by security. Nurses who had previously looked at me with pity now offered nods of quiet respect. I walked toward the trauma bay feeling lighter. The shame finally belonged to them. By noon, the consequences bled into the financial district. I received a text from a friend at Julian's firm. He was fired before his morning coffee even cooled. His firm did not want to be associated with a family currently under investigation for fraud. Thorne's influence was a wrecking ball that swung with terrifying precision. Julian had built his entire identity on prestige and connections. Now, he was radioactive. I deleted the text without replying. Watching his world burn from a distance felt like cold, necessary justice. My phone rang during lunch, displaying a number I had blocked. Then came the voicemail notification. Against my better judgment, I listened to it. It was Evelyn, but the imperious tone was gone, replaced by a jagged, weeping desperation. She spoke about family loyalty, hinting that they might lose the estate. She even asked if I could speak to Mr. Thorne on their behalf. The woman who called me a peasant was now begging for my charity. I pressed delete, erasing her voice from my life forever. The next domino fell later that afternoon. Sarah, the woman who stood in my place at the altar, made her move. According to gossip columns, she filed for an annulment 48 hours after the ceremony. She claimed fraud, citing that the Vances had misrepresented their financial status. It was brutally efficient. Sarah had married a portfolio, not a person. Once the money vanished, so did her vows. Julian was not just unemployed, he was publicly abandoned. I felt a strange pang of pity, but it vanished quickly. I left the hospital late, the sun setting behind the skyline. The air was crisp, signaling the end of summer. But as I walked toward the parking garage, a shadow detached itself from the wall. Julian stood there, looking like a ghost of his former self. His suit was wrinkled, his tie missing, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He held a small bouquet of bodega flowers wrapped in plastic. It was a pathetic attempt at manipulation. He stepped directly into my path. "Becca, please," he said, his voice cracking. I made a mistake. He tried to hand me the wilting flowers, but I kept my arms crossed. Sarah was a nightmare. She never understood me like you. He took a step closer, trying to use the charm that had worked on me for 3 years. "We can fix this." I told my mother I am done with her schemes. "It is just you and me now." He sounded delusional. He actually believed his total failure was a romantic gesture. I looked at the flowers, then up at his desperate face. "You are not here because you chose me, Julian," I said steadily. "You are here because Sarah left you and the money ran out." He flinched as if I had slapped him. "That is not true," he protested weakly. "I love you?" I laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the concrete garage. "You loved my paycheck. You loved feeling important. But you never loved me enough to stand up to your mother." My eyes dropped to his wrist. He was still wearing the Rolex I had bought him. The gold glinted under the garage lights, a symbol of everything I had sacrificed for a man who saw me as an accessory. "Give it to me," I demanded, holding out my hand. He looked confused. "The watch," I said. "I worked double shifts to buy that. You wore it while marrying another woman. Take it off." He hesitated, his face crumbling. It was the last piece of dignity he had left. With shaking fingers, he unclasped the heavy metal band. The watch slid into my palm, warm from his skin and heavy with history. He looked at his bare wrist, rubbing the pale skin where the metal had been. He looked small, defeated. "What am I supposed to do now?" he whispered, staring at the ground. "I have nothing." I looked at him, searching for the love I used to feel. It was gone, replaced by profound indifference. He was just a stranger in a cheap suit. "You figure it out," I said, dropping the bodega flowers into the trash can beside my car. "That is what adults do." I got into the driver's seat and started the engine. The sound echoed loudly in the enclosed space. Julian stood frozen, watching me. As I backed out, I saw him check his phone, probably hoping for a message from his mother that would never come. I drove out of the garage into the night. The air smelled like rain and freedom. I did not look back. 3 months later, the trauma center looked different. My new office door read, Dr. R. Sterling, head of trauma surgery. The administrative suspension felt like a bad dream from a different lifetime. I adjusted my white coat, feeling the weight of the new pager clipped to my waist. It was heavier, but it was a burden I had earned. Residents stopped to ask for my opinion. Their eyes filled with genuine respect. I was no longer the jilted bride or the victim. I was simply the boss. At noon, I met Elias Thorne at a bistro near the harbor. He was seated with 2 espressos waiting. The terrified father from the driveway was gone, replaced by a sharp friend. "My son started physical therapy yesterday," he said, pushing a cup toward me. "He hates the leg presses, but he is alive to complain." I smiled, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "Complaining is a good sign," I replied. We did not talk about debt or leverage anymore. We simply talked about life. It was strange to sit across from a billionaire and feel like an equal. He had saved my career, but he never let me forget who saved his son. "You look different, Rebecca," he noted, observing me over his cup. "Less like you are waiting for permission." He was right. For years, I had made myself smaller to fit into the Vance's narrow world. I had apologized for my ambition. Now, sitting in the warm sunlight, I took up space without apologizing to anyone. Walking home, I took a detour past the boutique, where I had bought my wedding dress. The mannequin in the window wore a gown similar to mine. Draped in lace and impossible expectations, a young couple was inside, arguing softly about the price of a veil. A year ago, I would have felt a pang of jealousy. But standing on the sidewalk, I just felt relief. I had narrowly escaped a prison disguised as a marriage. The glass reflection showed a woman who was finally whole. When I entered my apartment, the mail was waiting. Among the bills lay a cream-colored envelope. It was a wedding invitation from a fellow surgeon who understood our chaotic lives. I opened it, running my thumb over the embossed lettering. There was a +1 option, but I left it blank without hesitation. I checked the box for accepts with pleasure. This time, I knew I would be there because I wanted to be, not because I was performing a role for someone else. I stepped onto my balcony, watching the city lights flicker. The Rolex I took from Julian sat in a pawn shop downtown, exchanged for a down payment on this view. I took a deep breath, tasting the cool autumn air. The pager on my hip buzzed. A trauma incoming. I did not panic or check the time to see if it inconvenienced anyone. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I was exactly where I needed to be, finally on my own schedule.